Duval County Public Schools has a permanent leader at the helm who is inheriting many issues that have plagued the district. Megan Melicote, education reporter for Jax Today, and person who sits right next to me in the newsroom here, is joining us to discuss some of the challenges that the school district faces. Megan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan.
You know, it's interesting. I've been listening and watching you and the news as to what is happening in the school district. Dr. Bernier was sworn in last week as superintendent and by all accounts has hit the ground running. So let's talk first about what has led up to bringing this man on board, and then what is he doing since the school board officially voted him in, 2 weeks ago?
Yes, well, his arrival here in Jacksonville was like the end of a search process that took about a year, and it required two different search pools of candidates, if I remember correctly. Now, I joined the team more recently than that, but it's been a long process getting to this point. So it's good that he's out there now. He's been out in the community doing meet and greets. He met with the NAACP chapter earlier this week, and he seems to be trying to get a feel for constituents' needs, concerns, and things like that.
Now, we remember very well that the vote from the board was 6-1, and Warren Jones basically saying that he wanted Bernier on the job, but had some concerns about the high salary. But what were some of the issues that you uncovered as he was leading up to that vote from his former Lee County position?
Well, the big thing that we broke was a whistleblower complaint. Excuse me, a whistleblower complaint that was put against Dr. Bernier in Lee County, where he came from. He was the superintendent of schools in Lee County. And shortly before he left, there was a whistleblower complaint filed against him and it said that he was kind of I was thinking how to phrase this, that he racially profiled an employee, that he was very gruff and angry and things like that. And so the interesting thing that stood out to us was that when the whistleblower complaint was lodged, it was, he stepped down as superintendent about just a couple of days later. It wasn't long at all. And you don't always see superintendents, step away that quickly.
Well, he left the job. His house was up for sale the next day. Very quickly, this happened, and I guess there were some concerns or questions about that.
Yes. So we talked to our school board. I personally spoke with Chair Willie a couple of different times, and he assured us that they have done their due diligence, is the phrase that he likes to use, that they, I guess, contacted references that they felt were involved in the situation, and that they were reassured that it's going to be okay. That, of course, it's not unusual to see high-level administrators end up in positions like this. He's also named in a couple of federal civil rights lawsuits about an incident with a baseball team in Fort Myers. That was a racially charged kind of thing. And it's not unusual in and of itself to see high-level administrators be named in these types of suits and complaints and things like that. And so Willie and the rest of the board tell me that they feel confident that these things will work themselves out.
Well, he has certainly stepped into a group of a bunch of problems that have already existed, along with the fact that we have a large number of school board races up for grabs. What were some of the issues? What are some of the issues that he is facing that he has to start dealing with and getting maybe his people on board or getting the district to start working on this?
Right. So I think if you ask members in our community what the biggest issue facing the district right now is, it's probably the presence of that master facilities plan that suggests closing more or less 30 schools, give or take, consolidating and things like that. So that is a big deal to people in our community, and rightfully so, because closing a school is not an easy decision. There's reasons why you would do that in some cases, and there's reasons why you would want to keep a neighborhood school open in other cases. And so before Dr. Bernier arrived, the board was in the process of doing a series of community meetings and to hear from each of the 7 districts. And what the question they kept asking was, what makes your school special? Why should we keep your school open? What is it that separates your school from some of the other schools in the district. And so Dr. Bernier actually attended, I think, 3 of those meetings and listened. He just kind of sat in the audience quietly and listened to the public comment portions of people from the community who would get up and again say support for their it was typically elementary schools. Um, so I think that's going to be top on the list of his uh, to-do list, as he gets started here in the coming months. Um,
Yeah, but a lot of these schools are known in the past for having very high grade levels. They've
yes,
also been very popular with parents because they're in some of them are in long time subdivisions like Grove Park, Atlantic Beach, where the kids can walk to school. But
right.
those again are not the reasons to keep a school anymore. The reasons are in some of these schools there's very low population count and you have to consolidate because I guess the costs are way too much to operate a school when you've got empty classrooms.
Well, that's right, and I think that's becomes more of a philosophical question at that point, and how we want to operate schools in the American education system. Right? Is it important to have the neighborhood school that a child can walk to or ride his bike to, but might have 200-300 students, or is it better to operate these schools at a much more cost-effective point where you have maybe 800 students, but they're farther away from communities. They're not maybe the central hub of the community life in that neighborhood. The board is facing those questions now, and I don't think that there's a single right or wrong answer there because there's certainly points to be made on both sides. And so the board
There's
is
even
at least
the
having to decide
issue
what to do.
there's even the issue that some of these schools are in communities that need or they feel they need the neighbors feel they need to have a school in their neighborhood in their community because that gives it some credibility. Some of the north and northwest sides neighborhoods that might lose these schools, that's a school that has become legendary in that community, and you don't want to lose that identity, I guess.
Absolutely. Some of these schools, they date back to the early 1900s. I mean, Duval is a very old school district. It's one of the oldest school districts in the state. Um, and so it's hard to think about shutting down these neighborhood schools, but it's also difficult to see how a school with just a couple of hundred kids can be financially feasible. So it is a very top level concern for Dr. Bernier and the full school board. As you know, there's the majority of the board will turn over here in August.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, 4 to 7 seats will be
Four of the
decided
17th, right?
during the August 20th primary vote, and the winners take office in November. And that means the potential for a lot of new faces looking at some old problems. So, what are some of the
Yes, it
goals
does.
that have to be have to be worked on by this old or new or half new school board?
Yes, it does. So two of the members, Lori Hershey and Warren Jones, are getting term limited out, so they are not running again. And then Dr. Kelly Coker decided not to run again. So the only incumbent race is the one with Cindy Pearson in District 3. Um, so there will be a lot of new faces. Now, I believe that District 5 has 3 candidates running, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that means that one candidate would either have to get a majority or it would go with the top 2 candidates to the election in November. But most of the seats will be decided in the primary in August. Um, and so it will be interesting to see how that changes the character of the board and the way that they think about these issues. Um, I don't know that there's a way to predict how that will go.
If you're just joining us now, we're talking about the summertime break leading up to fall school and all the issues that the school district will have to face. And we're talking about it with our own Jax Today's Megan Malicote, who's been covering a lot of this over the past few months. You can join the conversation live on air by calling 904-549-2937. Email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. Now, Megan, what are some of the other issues that the school district is going to face, the school board's going to face, either the old, the new, or the mix?
Well, another issue is the student safety plan that Dr. Krisnar presented or published kind of on her way out the door a couple of weeks ago. It is not entirely new. There were some new things in it, but it was 20 points. So it was a very detailed plan um, of changes to make regarding student safety in the district, because of course the Douglas Anderson um, issues, let's say, have also been a frequent talking point in the district. And so on her way out the door, Dr. Krisner did publish this 20-point plan to help keep students safe. And then, so she published, I like to think of it as that she had more of like a human, easily read type of plan. And then um, those safety points are backed up by district policies. And so at the July meeting, the school board had some changes to the district policy on the agenda, but they decided to postpone the vote because the general counsel's office that's working with the district to help work on these Douglas Anderson related issues decided that really the legal background of these policies needed to be kind of rebuilt from the ground up, that they were working with policies that were originally drafted in the 90s. And so it would be better to kind of rewrite them rather than continuing to make changes here and there. And so my understanding, based on what they said at the board meeting last week, was that their changes are done. They just weren't done in time to put them out for public review in time for the July board meeting. And so they anticipate bringing them for a vote in September.
Now, you think about student safety. For me, the former parent, now grandparent, I think of student safety as the physical safety of the child in a school from exterior, maybe not interior issues, but this safety policy is born from something else, and some of that led to one former teacher going to jail, right?
Yes, it did. Jeffrey Clayton is a name that's well known in this community, unfortunately. And so Dr. Krisner's changes have a lot to do with teacher behavior to protect students from inappropriate conduct of teachers and sexual safety.
And the issue here, especially, was that apparently there was some issues going on at a certain school that were not being reported. And in fact, the state Department of Education got on the district's case about the apparent inability to post those complaints to the right people.
That's right. Manny Diaz's office at the State Board of Education he's been in touch with Dr. Krisner's office, and before her, Dr. Green's office, on and off over the last couple of years, trying to better hold accountable the district, or to ask, what the district is doing to protect students in Jacksonville. Most recently, I think it was in May, that they sent another letter to Dr. Krisner asking, okay, so what are you doing about these issues? And Dr. Krisner's response said, we've already made a lot of changes, and then here's some more changes that are coming. So one of the things that they did was they surveyed Douglas Anderson parents and stakeholders to ask, with these changes, here's some suggested changes, A, B, and C. Does this sound appropriate to you? Does this sound like it would help prevent the types of things that we've seen over the last many years, unfortunately?
And we talk about Jeffrey Clayton at the sentencing hearing. While the victim, that the one charge or the main charge against him, did speak out, there were others who were there who were not part of the criminal charging that also discussed. So there were issues that many say should have been sent to the board or the district and were not acted on, or were acted on much later.
Right. I think acted on much later seems to be the thing here. And so one of the changes that the district made was that they developed an electronic system for reporting. And I suppose, like anything else electronic, that makes it easier to report incidents in a timely manner and then share them with the various places that they need to go.
So what's the general response right now as we're awaiting the final vote on this? Is this something A, necessary, B, should have been done, C, will be easy to roll out and get done, and D, they expect some response?
It sounded like it. The board was largely in favor of the changes. In fact, they said, the general counsel's office actually asked the board to either vote down or delay the vote for the changes that were proposed in July. And the board was concerned how that would look, because they were, by and large, decent changes. I mean, changes that most people would look at and say, out of common sense, yes, let's make those changes. Things like being required to report incidents in the change in the language behind it, so that you're required, not asked or suggested, I suppose. So the board didn't really want to delay the vote or voted down because they're eager for these changes to take effect. And so the general counsel's office assured the board that the changes are actually already in place, that the superintendent's office has said, okay, so make these changes, but the legal backing behind it is what needs to be backed up. So it's not that they can't, go ahead and proceed with the new procedures. It's that they want the backing of the legal policies to be changed as well, and that's what they're going to do in September.
And as we've got a caller just here on hold, don't forget, obviously, the $1.45 million lawsuit to settle settlement that the board approved last week,
True.
brought by other Douglas Anderson students. So it shows that maybe this is the right time to roll out this plan and try to stop the other stuff that's happening.
True.
All right. Let's talk to Catherine in Avondale. Catherine, you're on the air, and you've got a comment on research. Catherine?
Yes, hi. I want to go back to the school closure question for a minute. I was just wondering what research the district has done on the effects of school size on achievement.
Yeah, they've always said that a small class size is especially important to academics. So, Megan, what do you think about that question?
Right. Well, as you'll remember, many years ago, on the Florida voters voted to limit class sizes as a constitutional amendment. And we've seen class sizes kind of grow from there because the state recently has removed all penalties for not following those regulations. So while it's still a constitutional amendment, the class sizes need to be limited. There's no repercussions for not doing it. And so that makes it kind of tricky to enforce, I suppose. But the district's original master facility plan was based solely on it was made by an outside consultant. They only asked them to look at things like where the districts overlapped or where school zones overlapped and where their schools were heavily or had a very low population and things like that. So that's a great question about what research they've done about smaller schools versus larger schools. And I think that gets back to the question that we mentioned earlier, is that it becomes kind of a philosophical thing, that there are certainly benefits to small schools and small classes. You build a sense of community in the neighborhood schools that way. But there's also some fiscal advantages to larger schools. So it will be interesting to see which way the district swings with that.
It's interesting, too. I'm a longtime reporter, and you're a longtime area resident. St. Johns County was at one time where it actually had to go to double sessions because it was so overcrowded and schools weren't ready yet. And now they're building schools left and right. Their academics on the surface seem to be very good. But I wonder if those class sizes of the Bartram Trail High School double sessions are coming back to haunt them because they had to jam so many people in one building.
Right. Well, and that's still an issue in St. Johns County. It's almost the opposite problem in St. Johns County that it is in Duval, is that they can't build schools fast enough in St. Johns, but in Duval they're having to discuss, closing schools. And like I said, Duval is one of the oldest school districts in the state. Some of its buildings date back so far that there's, you can see the effects of things like Jim Crow and so forth in the way that some of the buildings are so close together because you have black schools and white schools right next door to each other. And so in today's world, of course, it doesn't make sense to have two schools be so close that you can stand on the front steps of one and see another. So there's some work that needs to be done in Duval that's not part of St. John's list of issues, but then there's also problems in St. John's that aren't affecting Duval.
Where you can actually stand on the front porch of one and see another, like in the Fruit Cove community. We've got an email from Laura. She wants to add that some of the beloved A-rated neighborhood schools are also at capacity, and they're on the waiting lists, with waiting lists. And so what about the question of these schools, along with some of them being actually historically designated?
Absolutely. My understanding is that the district has now asked a consultant to go back and review the original plan and then all the feedback received from the community. And so as Dr. Bernier starts, his tenure here, that they will review all the feedback that they've received and come up with another plan, I suppose. Now there's a regulation in Florida that you can't close a school unless it's been announced. I think it's December, so you have to give a fair amount of notice. So the board was initially hoping for a final plan in November, but since the superintendent turned over, I don't know if that's still a reasonable expectation or not.
And obviously, we have some schools that are being built. Some schools are being consolidated into some of these new constructs, and that's all coming from, I believe, the half penny tax that was approved.
That's right. That's right. The half penny sales tax. I believe that it was a delay with one of those construction projects that caused the board to stop and look at a more broad, top level perspective from some of these schools, because construction costs have skyrocketed in recent years, right? And so it changed the costs that they had originally gotten into, signed up for with the half penny sales tax, and then what they called their bold plan to build new schools in certain strategic areas.
I mean, don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but Holiday Hill is building their new facility literally in an old ball field next to the original facility, so that the Southside Boulevard overpass, the walkway that students use, can still be used. I guess that's a logical choice if you have the land nearby and you can build new versus expand. But that, I think, is the only project that I can remember that's actually happening now. Is that correct? Or am I
Right.
wrong?
I believe that they paused all the projects that they could pause that made sense to pause.
Okay. Now, here's other issues as we're literally within, a month of school starting, is how are Duval County students measuring up to students in other Florida school districts? And is that a concern, again, for Bernier and that school board, new, old, mixed, coming in?
Well, I think the way that a district students measure up is always a concern for its leadership, right? So last week, the state released the results of the standardized testing. So right now, the third graders through 12th graders take a test called the FAST test. And the FAST test is only 2 years old. This year was the second year administering the test. And so you can't rightfully compare the scores from this year too far back, but you can compare it from this year and last year. And so Duval's, for instance, in English language arts, scores from 3rd grade to 10th grade. I'm looking over exact statistics here. 43% last year and 46% this year are considered to be on grade level or above with language arts topics, which is below the average of the state of Florida. The average of Florida is 53, and our neighboring counties are much higher too. For instance, St. John's that we just mentioned, they're at 72% this year. So I think that that's something that the new superintendent and the board will certainly be looking at.
So
mentioned it.
We're improving, but we're still not as good as other districts are, I guess.
That's right. So, any progress is good progress, I would say. But there's certainly more opportunity for progress. I think it's important to remember, too, that the third graders, who were the youngest children taking this test, were in VPK the year that COVID hit. So their entire time in the school system has been marked by the changes that COVID brought. And it will be interesting then, too, to compare the different grades. And like I said, the test has changed. So there's so many moving parts here that it's hard to compare too many different ways. But it's important to remember the lived experience of these children, that as they're taking these tests, is that they did not have a normal experience in kindergarten, first grade, and they're probably just now getting back to some sense of normalcy as they then start to take these tests.
Oh, I remember the virtual classes for our grandson, and that was extremely difficult for him to focus on. And you and I are talking right now via video links, so it's rather intriguing. First time I've not had a guest in studio. I understand, and I want to look at you on the screen. So, now obviously we are. So what you're saying is it's the first time really that we're looking at a student body that exists in real time in a classroom versus looking at statistics that were back in the COVID era, back in the getting your education via phone line or a video line. And so now maybe Dr. Bernier has everybody where they should be to now study and work on. Every warm body is where they should be, and you can observe how they are in person.
Right. So, if you think about when a child learns to read, it's what, kindergarten, first grade. And so these children were going to school largely virtually or, in a way that was very disrupted. Then, of course, there's lots and lots of other factors going on. And these were problems all across the state. We're not unique in that. But I like to remember that perhaps because I have a child who is in that age range that, when I think about how he started school, it's just so different from how we would have expected a child to start school.
Well, we've got a phone call right now from Hank on the north side. And Hank, what's your question? You're on the air.
I guess my question is, if you have a child that's have a low reading capacity, and you get with the school about it to help to get that child some help, but they decide to still promote. They still promote the child. What do you do in that instance?
Boy, that's an age-old question. Thank you for that. Megan?
Well, I am a big proponent of getting to know your child's teacher very well and being an active participant in the community at your school. Probably lots of the participants or lots of the supporters of these local community schools would probably echo that, is that the best thing you can do for your child's education is to is for your child's teachers and administrators to know you by name. And so and then when issues like that arise, then you can take it up individually, and then they kind of know where you're coming from in those circumstances.
Yeah, and from personal experience, obviously, when you do get to know the teacher and the staff, then there are discussions that occur, and you can conceivably decide together maybe this other program at this other school is the one that the child can go into versus promoting, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now, we've got an interesting question from Eugene on the north side. Eugene, let's talk about the new schools construction.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
To the hosts and guests. Quick question, or maybe a comment. I had a chance to visit down south Florida, Miami in particular, and something I noticed they did and are doing, instead of building new schools, what they're doing is they're putting the schools on stilts almost. I mean, it's like the school used to be one story, now it's 3 stories. They basically built it up almost like a high rise. Is that something that's being considered in Jacksonville, instead of going out securing new property and going through all the rigmarole of, just starting a new school right across the street from a new school, or the old school, when they can just build 2 more levels onto the old school and be done? It'd probably be a lot cheaper.
All right. Thanks, Eugene. Some of that might have to do with resiliency and the fact that the school is in a flood zone, so let's move it all up. But what about actually adding on to or augmenting? I mean, certainly some of, Megan, the oldest schools in the district, the original school building is the core and office space now, and now they've added or adding, some of those were portables, now they're adding buildings next to it.
Right. I haven't heard of any discussion to add additional stories onto the buildings, but yes, that is a common thing with the older buildings, that the small portions, and so that they then build out from there. But I think too, some of the consideration is that it's harder to upgrade an old building, right, than it is to build a new one sometimes. And with today's construction prices, they take that into account. Of course, that does not take into account the history and the personality of the old school buildings. And that's what a lot of the supporters of these neighborhood community schools would tell you, is that it's not the same to raise a historic building and build a new one.
Yeah, that was very tough with the decision for a certain Northside High School that is very historic to actually move it to another location and build new, because it was necessary. And the alumni who date back 50, 60, 70, 80 years, a little bummed that they're losing their alma mater there.
Absolutely.
Now, it's interesting. There is an historic high school on the city's west side that had a fire on the top floor back in the 80s. And what the district did was they basically consolidated classes in the gymnasium and auditorium with partitions, cleared out the top structure, and the school is now 1 story shorter using the building.
Oh my goodness.
which was intriguing. It was intriguing to actually see that happening. But let's go
Yes.
back to what's the political fallout if you eventually, as a school board, close a school that is historical, that is historically academically high scoring, that is in a neighborhood where power leaders have walked their kids to school and they don't want it to go. I mean, there's signs in many neighborhoods saying "Save our school," and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. I think it's hard to predict the political fallout, but certainly you can um, hypothesize anyway that neighborhoods don't want to lose their community schools. So it will be interesting to track how politics factors into the final decisions, and for whether to close schools, build new schools. That's certainly something that we'll keep an eye on.
And when it comes to the safety rules, is there any expected immediate impact? Could some long buried complaints surface in other schools? Could there be a rush to actually file a concern from a parent or another teacher?
I mean, I don't know about a rush coming in, but I think that it's always possible that a long buried complaint could come up. I think that happened at Douglas Anderson too. That when the complaints started to surface, that other complaints followed about other staff members, and so yeah. I mean, I don't know that it. I hope that a rush doesn't happen because that would be horrible for the students involved.
Yes.
But in the interest of prioritizing safety, if there are issues that need to arise, then it would be good to resolve them.
Well, Megan, here we are early in July and school hasn't even started. You're going to have a very busy next few weeks, and I'm sure I'll hear it all since you sit right next to me. So that's Megan Malakote, our Jax Today education reporter with a lot on her plate. So thank you very much for coming on with us today.